So there was this king who fell in love with a river goddess. And she agreed to marry him. But she said, "You must know, if you ever question any action that I take, I will leave you forever." Well, he agreed to this, and they were married, and life was good. And after a year, she gave birth to a baby boy. But on the day he was born, she drowned him in the river Ganges. Bam! Just like that. But the king did not ask, and he did not question. Well, this happened 7 times. 7 children were born to the 2 of them, and each one was drowned in the river Ganges. Finally, an 8th child was born, and they were walking there by the river. And the river goddess picked the child up and was about to throw him in, and the king said, "Wait! Stop! No! Spare our child!" Welcome to the Crane Bag Podcast. I am Jay Lehman. Today we are going to begin to explore the Indian epic known as the Mahabharata. We are going to begin with the hero Bhisma, a magical warrior. To step into this epic is to step into a river that whistles and whispers around our feet, whose source is unknown, whose final destination is unknown. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin. Once there was a wind. This wind blew across a pond and made ripples in its water. This wind blew across a desert and scattered some of its sand grains into the air. This wind blew through a town and made children laugh as they followed the feather of a chicken blowing down an alley. This wind blew through the sky, moving the clouds. This wind blew even in paradise itself, where all the gods were gathered to make offerings to Brahma, the creator god, the grandfather of them all. They were all there, those celestial, indescribable beings, the gods and goddesses of this world. They were bringing poems and flowers and songs to honor Brahma, the creator god. And the goddess of the river Ganges, Ganga by name, she had just entered the gathering. She had a white dress on, and she had a silver bowl in her hands filled with water and a few rose petals on that water. And the wind came and stirred the rose petals around in the bowl. And then, playfully, the wind ruffled her skirt up around her hips so that all the gods lowered their eyes out of respect for the goddess. All the gods lowered their eyes except for one. He was a king, or he had been a few moments before. He'd been a human king who'd lived through thousands of lives on earth. And through long work and suffering and spiritual wisdom gained over much time and much trial and much error and labor, finally he had been taken to the realm of the gods to live eternally as one of them. And when he looked at the river goddess Ganga, he liked what he saw, and he looked at her for a long time, drinking her in with his eyes. She noticed this and looked at him and smiled. And then she went to Brahma and put the silver bowl down before him with the rose petals in it floating on the water. And then the wind went away and sighed and whispered as it went. And then the river goddess, Ganga, she sat down with the other gods there, gathered around Brahma. And Brahma spoke, and he said, "O king, this is no longer your place, for you have disrespected a goddess. And because of this, you must go down now to the human world. You must return to earth, to be incarnated as a human being, to live out a life there in the mud and sweat and toil of that world. And perhaps, if you do well, if you labor hard, you will again come here to join us in this celestial realm. You will remember nothing of paradise when you come to earth. So, think on it carefully. Consider who shall be your mother, who shall be your father. Think on this, but for now, be gone. Go from this gathering. Leave us. Go!" So sadly, this king stood up And with tears in his eyes, he looked for a last time at all the gods gathered there, beautiful, resplendent, and then he turned and walked away. And he walked for some time through paradise, through the grassy fields there, until he came to a river, and he sat down beside this river, and he wept. And the river whispered and trickled past him. And after some time he looked with his divine wisdom at the waters of this river, and he saw souls in that water, each water drop like a soul born on earth. Some were the souls of animals, a skunk, a bear, a snake, an eagle. Others were the souls of humans, slaves, kings, a seamstress, a queen, all these lives caught in the river of time. He listened to them, the singing of that river moving through the grass, and he considered. And then something in his heart said, yes, and he seized upon a certain soul, a soul born in the land of the Kurus, in the city of Hastinapura, a king of that land named Pratipa. And he said, that man will be my father. And having decided this, he looked around at paradise. He looked at the green grass. He heard the trickling of that river. He looked at the fine, beautiful, unimaginable palaces of the gods, reaching up far into the sky. He looked up at the sky as well, blue and golden at the same time, magnificent. He heard the music around him, the humming of this celestial sphere. And then he closed his eyes and saw only darkness. And down on earth, in the land of the Kurus, in the city of Hastinapura, in the royal palace, in a bedroom of that palace, the queen gave birth to a baby boy. And the nursemaids noticed that this boy, well, he cried more than most children did when he was born. Cried as though he were grieving for some wonderful, magical kingdom he had lost, or perhaps for some beautiful song he had heard once but now could no longer hear. Still they took the baby boy and placed him on the breast of the queen. And he cried and cried for a while, and then he slept. And his mother the queen looked down at him and said, I shall name him Santanu. Yes, that shall be his name. And then the queen slept as well. Outside, the sun was about to rise. The princes and the princesses of this kingdom were getting up and putting on their finery, their gold rings and their necklaces. Soldiers were already awake, sharpening their spears. Mothers in the houses of that city of Hastinapura, they were starting the cooking fires in their houses. And somewhere a beggar was moving through the streets, going from one garbage pile to the next, hoping to find a crust of bread or a handful of stale rice. And in paradise, the gathering in honor of Brahma was over, and the gods were all going their separate ways. And Ganga, the goddess of the river Ganges, she left that gathering and walked across the fields of paradise. And she came to a river trickling through one of those fields, and beside that river there were 8 gods, and they were all weeping. Dear ones, she said, why do you weep so? And one of them said, we are the Vasus, and we were cursed by a great seer on earth named Asishta. He cursed us to be reborn on earth in that realm of mud and sweat and laughter and tears. He cursed us to be reborn as humans and to leave this paradise behind. So that is why we grieve, dear goddess. And she looked at them and said, ah, but dear ones, the earth is beautiful as well. There is mud and suffering, it is true, but there is beauty as well. There are leaves on the trees. There are songs in the villages. There are stories told by bards. There is the sweetness of life, the rushing of rivers. It's very beautiful down there. Yes, yes, they said. Yes, yes. And then one of them, Dayus by name, he looked at the goddess and he said, you know, I have an idea. Yes. We need a mother down there. We need to be incarnated in a body down there. So what about this? What if you were to agree to become our mother, to give birth to us on the earth? And after each of us is born, you will kill us right away, so that we will not have to spend time down there on earth, and quickly we will return here to these beautiful streams of paradise, and these grasses, and these beautiful trees, and these palaces here. What do you say? Would you agree to that?" And she looked at them with compassion in her heart, and she said, "Yes, I will agree to that. I will do you that favor. I will give birth to you on earth, and I will kill you as soon as you are born, so that you will return here to paradise. But the thing is, you will need a father as well. And who is it who should be your father?" And as she said these words, she remembered that king who had looked at her in the gathering, and the longing in his heart and in his eyes. The Vasus considered for a while. They thought and they talked amongst themselves, and then Dayu said, "You know, I think our father should be a good man, a king, someone who has learned much about the Dharma, the way of the world, someone who is wise and generous and fierce when he needs to be. And I think that person is the king of the land of the Kurus, the king who lives in the city of Hastinapura, a king named Santanu." "Excellent," Ganja said. "I think that is a lovely idea." Meanwhile, down on earth, Santanu grew up. Days and nights came one after the other, as they do. The great wheel of time spun on its axle of silence and eternity, and he was surrounded from an early age by wisdom and beauty and the wealth of that place, the palace of the Kurus. And as he grew older, he was schooled in the Vedas, those ancient scriptures older than the earth itself. And he was schooled in Dharma, the way of the world. He was taught the kingly duties, the things he would need to know, diplomacy and how to wheel and deal, horsemanship and the use of a sword and a spear and a bow and an arrow, and how to make delightful conversation, and how to write poetry, and knowledge of the forest and of the animals and of the seasons of the earth. So he grew up in a place of beauty and splendor. Years went by. And finally, when he was a young man, his own father became ill and died. King Paratipa died, and Santanu was crowned as king of the land of the Kurus. And he was a king without a queen, but still he ruled wisely and well, despite the loneliness in his heart, which he often felt. And one day he went hunting beside the river Ganges with his bow and his arrow. And he looked at the language of the forest. He studied the tracks of the animals, the smells, the traces there. And he tracked a deer and followed it to the side of that river. And finding it, he took an arrow from his quiver, fitted it to the bow, pulled the bowstring back, and let the arrow go. Thunk! It plunged into the heart of that deer. It leapt once, twice, and then it crumpled and died, the light going from its eyes. And Santanu went to that deer, reached down, and he pulled the arrow out. And as he did so, he heard a sound from the river, and he looked, and he saw a woman striding out of the water, straight out of the water, her head first. Then, step by step, she came out of the water and stood dripping on the shore, every drop of water moving lazily down her body, as if it adored her so. And in that sparkling moment he said, "Woman, goddess, if that is what you are, you are lovely, I adore you. I am a king without a queen. Come, be my queen, rule with me in the city of Hastinapura." And she looked at him and said, "O king, so easily you would throw yourself onto the fire of love, the fire of marriage, so easily you would do that, to be scorched perhaps by those flames?" "Yes," he said, "I would. Yes," he said, "I do." And she said, "Well, dear king, you are a wise man and a strong man as well, and a good king, I can see that. But if we are to be wed, if we are to be man and wife, king and queen, well, you must agree to a certain thing, and it is this. You must agree never to question any of my actions. No matter what I do, you must not question those actions, or else I will leave you and never return. Can you agree to this?" And the king pondered briefly. But looking at this goddess stepped from the river, well, his heart said yes, and he in his voice said, I can agree to that. I do agree. My heart agrees, my body agrees, my voice agrees, my dear. Yes, please, I agree to this. I will not question, and may you please be my queen. And she stepped forward, looking into his eyes, and took his hands and kissed him on the lips. And then the two of them lay down in the music of those waters and enjoyed the delights of love for a long time. And some time later, the two of them were married in a ceremony there beside the river. Everyone came, a beautiful ceremony, and music was played, and there was a delightful feast afterwards, and there was singing and carousing, and bottles fell under the chairs, and the bard forgot half the story. All kinds of things happened. And then they were crowned. She was crowned as queen of that kingdom. And now King Santanu and his queen Ganga, the river goddess, they ruled over the kingdom of the Kurus, and they ruled wisely and well. But about a year later, the queen gave birth to a baby boy. Such a darling baby boy. The king was overjoyed. At last, a son, an heir for my kingdom, so this kingdom can go on after I am done with my time here. He was overjoyed, a beautiful baby boy. But a few days later, he went walking with his queen, Ganga, by the river. She was carrying the baby boy in her arms. They were walking there in the muddy place between the shore and the water there. They were walking, and suddenly she took a few more steps out into the water. He remembered this later, these few steps she had taken into the deeper water. And she walked and took another step, and then another. And then she lifted up the baby in her arms, lifted it up high, and threw the child out into the water. And the child cried out and fell beneath the waters, and cried out a second time, and then went down and did not cry out again. And the king, Santanu, he gasped in shock, and he was about to speak, but then he said, no, do not question, or you will lose the one you love. So he stifled his questions. He said nothing, and the tears fled down his face. And then Ganga turned and walked towards him. And she took his trembling hand in her own and kissed him on the cheek. And they returned to the palace in the city of Hastinapura. Well, time went on. Days and nights came as they do. The moons followed each other until another year had gone by. And after that year was done, well, the goddess Ganga, she gave birth to a boy a second time. Again she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and again he was charming and lovely, and again they walked there on the shore of that river. And again she took a few steps into those waters, and a few more, and again she lifted up the child, and as King Santanu watched, she threw that child into the waters, and it cried out once and twice, and then it cried no more, and was gone. And King Santanu wanted to cry out, but he said to himself, no, do not question, or you will lose the one you love. And he stifled his cries and his questions. And again she took his hand, and again they returned to the palace in the city of Hastinapura. So it went, and over the years she gave birth to 7 children, 7 baby boys, and each one she drowned in the river Ganges in the same way. Finally, an 8th child was born to her. Finally, they walked again on the shore of that river, King Santanu and his queen Ganga, the river goddess, and she had her baby boy in her arms, nursing him there. And when he was finished, she took a few steps out into the water. She lifted him up and was about to throw him, and King Santanu said, no, stop, why this cruelty? No, save our son, save our child. And she did not throw the child into the water. And she turned, and she walked back, carrying the child to King Santanu. And she said, I will not kill this child, but it means I must leave you. This is your own son. He shall be raised by you, but first I must teach him certain things, certain magical things, and then we will return to you, and you will raise him as your son. But why, he said, why this cruelty? Why have you killed so many of our children in these waters? Why have you done that? Dear goddess, tell me now. And she said, there is a mountain in this world that cannot be climbed by humans. A mountain that humans cannot reach even in their thoughts. It is called Mount Meru. And the gods and goddesses often come to the peak of this mountain and hang out there and sing their songs and tell their stories. And once upon a time, 8 gods known as the Vasus, they were wandering along the side of this mountain, where there are mango trees and green grass and rivers flowing, beautiful things. And they came to a certain place, and they looked far off, and they saw a hut. And one of them said, what is that? And another said, that is the hut of Asishta, the great sage. Over thousands of lives he has studied the spiritual nature of this world. He has studied the Dharma, the way of this world. He has studied the Vedas, those ancient scriptures. He has studied the moon and the sun, suffering and laughter and joy and pain. He has learned much from his countless lives, and he is a man of great magic, a visionary. And he has a cow. A magical cow. And you know, it's said that if a human drinks the milk of this cow, that man or woman will live for 10,000 years. Really? Said 10,000 years? Yes, that's what they say. 10,000 years. Wow, that's a long time. And one of the wives of one of these Vasus, a goddess, she said, well, you know, I am friends with a certain princess in a kingdom down there on earth, and I would so dearly love for her to have some of this milk. For then she could live for 10,000 years on this earth. A beautiful thing. What do you think? What do you say? Could you steal this cow? And Darius there, he said, well, I think we could. It's possible. Oh, do it, she said. Yes, steal the magical cow so we can share this milk with this human princess who is my dear friend. Well, that night, silence came, darkness came, and the stars shone down their nourishing poetry onto the world. And the 8 Vasus, all brothers, they became invisible. And like a wind moving quietly, silently, without a sound, they moved over the fields on the side of Mount Meru. They moved away from a certain mango tree where they were staying, and this way and that, through the bushes, through the ferns, and they came to the house of Asishta. And they went to the barn, and soundlessly they opened the barn door and went inside, and there was the cow. And magically they led that cow away, as though the cow was following a certain dream. It was having a beautiful, lovely dream. And pulling it forward by this dream, they guided the cow away out of that barn, across the fields, and back to the mango tree where they were staying. And the cow then slept, and so did the Vasus. Well, in the morning the sun rose, and Asishta the sage, he awoke, and right away he knew something was wrong. He felt a gray quiver in all of creation. Something was out of joint. He went around smelling here, smelling there. He went to his barn, opened the door. My cow is not here, he said. Someone has taken my cow. It didn't just wander away. Someone has taken my cow. He started looking around behind his house, behind some trees over here, down by the river, over these hills. No cow. Where is my cow, my magical cow? Who would steal my magical cow from this place? And then he went back home and he settled down and he looked with his divine vision. The rainbow wheel of his mystical vision went out. Ripples went out into the world of awareness. They went to his barn, his house, some distant trees, a hill. These ripples went far out, passing away. They got to a large mango tree, and there was the cow, and there were the Vasus who had stolen his cow. Aha! He said aloud, and he stood up and said, you Vasus, I curse you! For you have stolen my cow which did not belong to you. I curse you to be reborn on the earth, to descend to that realm of mud and sweat, to enter that grinding meat wheel of creation, become people once again, and live out your lives, and to know the suffering and the toil of the earthly world. That is my curse for you have stolen my cow. And a crack of thunder sounded, and his curse went out into the world like a ripple, and it got to the Vasus, and they heard this curse. And they sorrowed in their hearts, and sorrowfully they came walking across the fields, and with heads cast down they came to him there outside of his house. And they said, Asishta, You great wizard man, you great visionary sage, we are sorry for what we have done. Just a little prank. We stole your cow, yes, but please have mercy on us. We don't wish to be born down there in that world of blood and sweat and tears down there. Please spare us. Change your curse. And he said, a word once uttered cannot be taken back. I have given you this curse, and you deserve this curse, but I see that you are sorry. So I will lessen this curse slightly. 7 of you will be born as humans down there on the earth, and you will be killed immediately and brought back to paradise here. But 1 of you, Daius, well, you shall live out your entire life on the earth. You shall be known as Bhisma, the son of Santanu. You will be a great wizard of warcraft. You will know many things. You will know the wisdom of Dharma, the way of the world. You will honor your father and your mother. You will bring great magic and great power and strength and harmony to the kingdom of the Kurus. This is my word. This is what I say. This is what shall come to pass. And then the Vasus left him, and sorrowfully they returned to the sweet world of paradise. So, my king, I found them there, and I agreed to give birth to them here on the earth. And I have done so. I have given birth to them, and I have drowned them in this river to send them back to paradise as quickly as possible. But this last one, this boy, he shall live out his life on the earth. And he will be known far and wide as Bhisma, and he will do great deeds. But first, dear king, man of my heart, I must take him away and teach him certain things, certain magical things. I will school him for several years on my own, and then I will return him to you. So, my king, I will see you once more. Goodbye, goodbye. And she turned and walked into the river, walked until the waves covered her shoulders, walked until they covered her head, and her child did not cry out. And then there was only the river there, and King Santanu looking at it, the river flowing away out of the mountains and down towards the sea. And King Santanu wept to see them go. But then a little voice in his heart said, I have a son. I have a son. And filled with that joy, he turned and walked back to his palace in the city of Hastinapura. And he ruled there for many years, and he ruled wisely and well. Though he was a king without a queen, though he was often lonely, still he ruled wisely and well. And one day, years later, he was walking along the shore of the Ganges, when he noticed that that river was not flowing as strongly as it usually did. There seemed to be less water in that river. There were muddy places on the banks of the river that were not usually there at this time of year. So he followed this river, walking for a long way into a forest, and he came to a place with many boulders, and there, on a boulder, there was a young man. He seemed to be glowing, sparkling in the sun, and he had an arrow there. He picked it up, put the arrow into his bow, fitted it to the string, pulled it back, and he let it go, firing it into the river. And as this arrow traveled through the air, this arrow became 10 arrows, and those 10 arrows became 100, and those 100 arrows became 1,000. So a great thicket of arrows showered down into that river, and he saw there were many arrows there already, blocking the flow of this great river. And the boy giggled as he did this, and laughed, and reached down and picked up a second arrow. And the king said, Who are you? What are you doing, boy? Who are you? And from behind him, he heard a whispering sound of someone stepping from the waters, and he turned, and there was Ganga, sparkling in the light, the waters of that river trickling down her body, and she looked at him and said, Ah, my king, it's good to see you again. This is our son, Bhisma. I have schooled him in the Dharma of this world, the way of the world. I have schooled him in the Vedas. I have schooled him in the use of the bow and the spear and the arrow and all the kingly things he needs to know. And so now you must school him as well. Take him. He is yours. And Bhisma looked at his father and smiled and reached out with his arms and ran to his father, and the two of them embraced each other, and tears of joy fell down their cheeks for being together once again. And then King Santanu heard the whispering of the waters, and he opened his eyes and looked, and there was Ganga, the goddess of the river. And she looked at him and said, "Goodbye, my king. Goodbye, my love." "Goodbye," he said. "Goodbye." And she turned and walked into the river. Walked until the waters covered her knees, and then her hips, and then her shoulders, and then her head. And then she could not be seen. And then there was only the river flowing, far and away. But Bhisma was there. "You're my son," he said. "You're my son." "Yes, father. Let us go. Show me where you live." And King Santanu took Bhisma and led him back along the course of the river, back to the city of Hastinapura, back to the palace where he lived. And there was a great celebration welcoming Bhisma to that kingdom and to that palace. And afterwards there was a great feast, and the bards sang songs that were blue and were green, and people told jokes. They laughed until they cried, and they cried until they laughed. And there was delicious food of all kinds, and the entire evening was a beautiful song sung by that place and by the people there, that hummed in the air afterwards like the ringing of a great bell. And when the time was right, everyone went off to their bedrooms and prepared to sleep. And the king, too, went to his royal bedroom. And after a while his servants left him, and he was left alone in that glorious room with a single candle burning. And when he was ready to sleep, he went to that candle and took it in his hands and was about to blow it out. But just then a gust of wind came in the window, and the candle flickered as though the wind itself would blow that candle out. But as the king watched, the wind went away and the candle burned strong. He paused for a moment, listening, as the wind went whispering away. And then the king blew that candle out, darkness filled that room, and he slept. Hey, Jay Leeming here. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to this story. Well, this is a different animal, huh? That's what I'm thinking. I don't know what you're thinking, but this is a different animal to some of the other stories I've told and read and explored. I don't know what to say about it. Its structure is different. It's not all nice and neat like this happened, bang, we're done. It's a part, as I've said, of a larger thing. So it's something like perhaps a fractal. It's something like perhaps a leaf on a tree. And the leaf reflects and echoes the structure of the entire tree, even while it is just simply a leaf. And what is this story? Well, we could say it quickly, right? There's a king, marries a river goddess. They have 7 kids. She kills them all. The 8th one lives. And he's called Bhisma. The end. Bang. But I wanted to give you a little more of the background, the origin story, because it says a lot about the world of this story and the questions the story wrestles with. What's up with paradise, right? Paradise shows up right from the beginning. We get this character who looks at Ganja when the wind ruffles up her skirt there. And he's sent down to the kingdom of earth. What's the place of love in this whole story, huh? Is love good, or what's going on? I'm talking to you, coming to you live, so to speak, from North America, a Puritan country, where there's a long tradition of sexuality. Ooh, look out, stay away. Even though it's 2022 right now, as I say this, that is in the air. And it's tempting to put that on this story and say, man, they were just not into love, right? I mean, as soon as you fall in love with somebody, you end up sent down to the earth, which is a bad thing, according to this story, perhaps. So is this story just rejecting the earth? Is it rejecting love? Should we just fold ourselves up into a lotus posture and hum the great hum of the universe for all time and eternity? Well, in some ways, that's a thing this story seems to say, but it says other things as well. And love keeps happening, and desire keeps happening. And this king sees the river goddess Ganja and is struck by her beauty. And then he goes down to earth and is struck by her beauty again and gets to actually be in relationship with her. Weird as that is with the killing of the kids and stuff like that. But nevertheless, he gets to, fulfill that relationship for a while anyway. Also, it's interesting to me the wind takes a part in this. It's great. It's just a totally random element which begins the whole story. Without the wind, it seems, nothing would have happened. So we have these gods who are powerful, as you would think, and these humans, and we've got paradise, and we've got the earth. But then the wind comes like a trickster spirit, maybe, in an element, just randomly makes her dress ruffle up, and he sees it, and bang. So chance is in the world as well, which I love. So there's this fruitful dialogue between paradise and the earth. They aren't just completely separate. They are woven together by love, by desire, by these curses and vows people make. So while it's tempting to take on this kind of Puritan mindset and look at this story as like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. It's just an old story saying, keep your hands to yourself and everything will be okay. I don't think that's the whole story. I think, and again, I'm someone outside of this culture. This comes from India, not North America, not England, not Puritan England of the past. So a big disclaimer, as in some ways I cannot claim to know what I'm dealing with here in this story. But I'm just responding to it honestly, as honestly as I can. And I'm trying to throw away that whole Puritan thing. And I think the story itself has that in it, because nothing happens without desire. Desire is the cause of the world in some ways, at least of this little world we've just experienced. Desire for the magical cow, let's say. Desire for the river goddess Ganja, the lovely river goddess there. And because of that, this king goes down. Because of that, Bhisma is born eventually. And as we shall see, hopefully, if I get to it, he plays a crucial part in the great epic of the Mahabharata, and is in some ways the cause of that whole story, in some ways. So I just want to wash that sort of Puritan mindset out of my head and look at what we got here and remember the river goddess there and the king on the shore of that river. And this wild and marvelous love affair between eternity and the daily. As William Blake, the English poet, said, eternity is in love with the productions of time. The river goddess agrees to go down there and give birth to these Vasus, the gods. So it can't be all bad down there. And a moment which jumps out for me is King Santanu stifling his questions. Do not question, or you will lose the one you love. And maybe this is just my own thing. Maybe it's totally out of context. But I've felt that, in relationship. Something comes up and you don't want to mention it. And if I don't mention it, everything will be okay. And it's usually not. Usually, eventually it comes out. Whatever it is. Something that's bugging you, something that has happened, something you need to talk about. And eventually, Santanu gets to that point and he can't hold it in anymore. And he says, stop, crazy lady, what are you doing? And, well, maybe that was supposed to happen. If he hadn't done that, she wouldn't have saved the last child. Bhisma wouldn't have been born, and many other events that are still to come would not occur. But I'm just staying with that moment when he is there. Don't question, or you will lose the one you love. And he does lose the one he loves, which is, of course, the sadness of it. I'm remembering also those other stories. The Golden Tree, that's a story I've told, a Nart saga, in which there's a harmonious marriage between the other world, which is under the sea in that story, and a human. And of course, in the Finn McCool stories, there's such a relationship which doesn't last either, just like this one, but it has fruitful results. Is this just a imagination game? Is this just nothing? I mean, is the other world really there? Can we have a relationship with it in some way? In the modern US of A, we tend not to think so. But in other countries, in other cultures, and in the past, people have definitely felt that. I mean, it's kind of obvious. I don't even need to say it, right? But there's moments that strike me. Like I remember again in being in Bali, a Hindu country, and talking to a woman there, and she said, "As long as I have money to buy offerings for the spirits, I know that my family and I will be okay. As long as I have the money to make offerings to the spirits." So she believed that those offerings were crucial to feed the other world, to feed the spirits, to make her and her family be all right. And there's other cultures where, you have to sing, the Mayans in Guatemala, right? In what we call Guatemala, you have to sing to get that sun to rise because the sun has a hard job. Humanity has a crucial part to play, which is to make offerings to this world, the unseen world, in order to nourish this world, so they continue to nourish this world. Martine Prechtel, Prechtel, has spoken eloquently about this. And you see it in stories as well. So I love that in this story, the other world exists and is woven together with the everyday world we live in. I love the scope of these stories as well. You have characters who've lived thousands of lives. That's great. It's just really cosmic. It's bigger than a lot of other stories I think of. And as I said before, it's big in the sense that paradise and the earth are there right away as two places which are in sweet and brutal dialogue with each other. And in my own life, I've felt those forces at work, I guess. The forces, the desires for introversion and extroversion. Perhaps we could put it that way. To just shut myself up in a tower and be at one with the universe, right? But it usually doesn't last too long. After a while, you can only be at one with the universe so long, unless you're professionally trained, and I'm being serious about that, unless you have a practice of some kind. And eventually, for most of us, comes the call to enter the world again. And perhaps it's love which brings that on. It can be love of a person, attraction to a person. It could be love of a thing, a subject, a melody, some music, or a thing like an animal, the ocean. It draws you out of yourself, your small closed world, and brings you out into the bigger picture. I'm going outside, Mom. I'm going outside, Dad. I'm going to find out what's out there. So in this story, I feel those two rhythms of sort of contracting, and expanding. Contracting, retreating to paradise, living up there, and then going out, firing the arrow at the deer, killing the deer, seeing the river goddess stepping from the water. Bang! Just like that. It's a beautiful moment. And what governs those two desires in us? Well, it's hard to say. But I guess it's just a natural thing. I'm saying this, I'm seeing myself in Brooklyn, holed up in my apartment writing poems years ago. I'm seeing myself on a stage in Minneapolis of some bar. Let's just not say some bar. Let's say the Red Sea at Cedar and Riverside, the corner of those two roads, streets. And it's 1 a.m. and I'm playing songs to the nearly empty bar with my band. And why am I doing that? Because something in me was like, well, you can't stay home forever. You write these songs, they got to go somewhere. You write this music, you can't just play it in your room. It's got to go out into the world. And I answered that, and that's what I found, is a smoky bar at 1 a.m. And I learned a lot from it. And where are you, oh listener? Are you out in the world, buying and selling, laughing and weeping? Or are you home in the cave, in the inner world? Where is paradise for you? It moves, it's all around, it's a jungle gym, it's a circle, it's a Ferris wheel. And perhaps there's more than two options. And we go in, we go out, the heart beats and the heart rests, and the heart beats and the heart rests. And winter comes and summer comes, and sleep and waking. And we go out and we go in. And such is the rhythm, the dance of this life. Thank you for listening to this story. May it sit well in your hearts. May it give you good things to chew on, things that nourish you, questions that perhaps don't have easy answers. You can support this podcast by going to my Patreon page, which is, what the heck is it? Patreon.com/StoryJL. Thank you very much to the folks who are able to support me that way. That keeps these podcasts happening. We want them to be happening. We don't want them to be stuck dead like old rotten stones. Stones don't get rotten, though, Mr. Leeming. You can also go to my website, jleeming.com, and there's a bunch of stories there that I've recorded and piled up over time. And I would say to you, wind in the trees. I would say to you, wind in the trees beside the river. I would say the river. The river flowing from the high mountains to the sea. The river that wants to flow, that knows to flow, that is rarely still, that is always itself as it rushes and rollicks and thunders down towards the sea. Thank you for listening to this story, and take care.